Hey guys! Tonight we're diving slowly and sleepily into the quietly absurd tale of Poseidon, Lord of the Sea, attempting something no one thought possible, whispering. You're floating somewhere between dream and myth, half buoyed by warm salt water, when a soft breeze brushes your ear and you hear it, not a roar, not a crash, but the god of the oceans, trying to be quiet. Yes, this is the same Poseidon who caused earthquakes when someone forgot his birthday offering. The same divine drama king who once turned a whole island inside out over a minor insult, and now he's crouching by a tide pool, whispering sweet nothings into a conch shell like it's a customer service hotline. You probably won't survive this not from fear, but from bafflement at how such a loud myth got this sleepy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together, where the sea has gone unusually. You squint through the shimmering horizon of the Aegean. Still, not suspiciously so, just off enough that even the fish seem to glance sideways. Poseidon leans over a tide pool and clears his throat gently, as if auditioning for a role in a silent film. Perched atop a flat sea rock, testing, he murmurs into a spiral-shaped seashell. Holding it like a 1990s karaoke mic, the waves lap gently. No one drowns, nothing explodes. For a guy whose mere size once sank pirate fleets, this is a major lifestyle change. To be fair, this was a long time coming. Historians still argue whether Poseidon's violent tempers were just dramatized sea lore, or if Olympus genuinely had to budget extra for flood cleanup. One scroll from the Temple of Hera describes a watery tantrum over Poseidon being denied extra kelp snacks. But lately, he's mellowed. No tsunamis this month. Instead, he's been meditating near underwater vents and reading scrolls with titles like "Anger is just loud sadness." You paddle slowly closer, invisible in the magic of this dreamlike state. The rock he sits on looks suspiciously like a soap dish, and his beard flows into the tide like an abandoned mop. A seagull lands beside him, squawks loudly, and gets a mild side-eye. No thank you. Poseidon tells the gull with impeccable manners, "Today is about gentle control." You raise an eyebrow, or maybe you're dreaming. Either way, it's strange and oddly charming. There's something ritualistic about it. The way he places the seashell just so on a cluster of barnacles, the precise flick of his fingers as he orchestrates a trickle of sea foam. He breathes in. The ocean does. 2, he whispers again, just barely audible. Settle. A ripple glides out from the shore. It's more of a sigh than a wave. No storms thrown like bar stools. A jellyfish lifts one translucent tentacle, as if saluting. He tries again. Hush. Another ripple. This time, a small school of sardines stops mid-sprint, turns slowly, and drifts as if in a trance. It's not powerful, not godly, but it works. Now, if you're wondering why Poseidon would ever care about being quiet, you're not alone. Ancient poets didn't exactly paint him as the reflective type, but a papyrus fragment discovered near Thera claims Poseidon once lost a wager with Hermes over who could stay silent the longest. The loser had to tame the Aegean with only their inside voice. No one expected Poseidon to take that seriously, but gods get bored. And when you've turned dolphins into messengers, tridents into lightning rods, and sunk at least 3 cities by sneezing, you start to crave a challenge. The challenge now, mastery through subtlety. Of course, not everyone is thrilled about it. The Nereids think he's going soft. The sirens don't understand what to do with all the silence between notes. And Cerulean, his prized hippocampus half-horse, half-fish, all drama, keeps giving him side glances like he's in a weird sea cult. But you're just here, floating near his moment of reinvention. The water smells faintly of minerals and sun-heated salt. A hermit crab scuttles past your hand like it's hurrying to a job interview. And through it all, Poseidon keeps trying. Relax, he whispers. This time, the ocean listens a little more. Somewhere miles away, a fishing boat stops rocking. A seal blinks and nods off on a rock. Even the seagull hushes. A historical note for your dreams. In early depictions, Poseidon wasn't just the god of the sea, he was also associated with horses and earthquakes. The Greeks believed the ocean's heaving swells and quakes on land were connected, because in myth, everything loud was probably his fault. But in this dreamier version of the myths, we imagine what would happen if he tried something different. A quieter Poseidon, a gentler tide, a god learning to murmur instead of roar. And so you drift, salt on your lips, breeze in your hair, listening to a myth finally catching its breath. You're floating just behind Poseidon now, or maybe you're curled into a bubble that follows him like a lazy sea sponge. Either way, the god has decided to give whispering a second try, but this time from the comfort of his chariot. Pulled by 4 jittery hippocampi with tangled seaweed manes, the chariot is less regal thunder and more barnacle-clogged antique every time the wheels turn. They squeak like an old swing set. Poseidon raises an eyebrow at the noise, mutters calm. And the squeaking slows but doesn't stop. He sighs, still working on that one. The hippocampi clomp along the seafloor, tossing glances at each other like disgruntled ride-share horses. You hitch a ride, tucking yourself into a jellyfish umbrella above the chariot like it's a tourist canopy. The whole procession wobbles through anemone forests and over glimmering reefs. Poseidon clenching the reins as if they're nervous thoughts. This isn't a joyride, it's therapy. The dolphins flank him soon after, clicking and whistling their usual gossip. One zips in close and nudges his elbow with a knowing grin. So, heard you're whispering now. Poseidon rolls his eyes. It's called sound minimalism. The dolphins laugh in stereo, flipping in the water like synchronized sarcasm. But he's committed, and he starts trying again. Gentle, he says. A distant wave curls without breaking. Drift, he murmurs. A nearby coral reef glows slightly, as if flattered. Then, a hiccup. One of the hippocampi steps into a trench it didn't see. The chariot jolts. Poseidon jerks upright. By the brine of... He stops himself, breathes in, tries again. As easy. The trench settles into stillness. Even the sea cucumbers seem impressed. One scroll fragment suggests Poseidon really did journey across the sea to test if his presence could be softened to a ripple. Another theory claims it was simply his divine boredom showing up in weird ways. Your ride continues past a sunken amphora garden. Historians still argue whether this moment, known in some oral traditions as the temperless trot, was allegorical or based on a real reef-side parade. Pots half-buried like forgotten to-do lists. The hippocampi start to relax. Poseidon's knuckles loosen around the reins. And then he does something unthinkable. He makes small talk. Turning to the dolphins, he says, "How's the kelp bloom near Naxos?" Silence. One dolphin blinks. Another makes a clicking sound like someone dropping a marble into a sink. The lead dolphin finally says, Poseidon nods solemnly. Sayet, oh, thriving. As if he'd just confirmed a treaty. It's a deeply awkward moment, made worse by the awkward current dragging an old sandal across your vision. You try not to laugh. You fail slightly. Then you arrive at a reef platform, a shimmering clearing lined with fan coral and sea stars. This is Poseidon's self-made reflection zone. A kind of floating therapy circle where the sea has been instructed to shut up gently. You drift off to the side, listening. A fish swims by and says, "Blub," in the softest tone possible. The message seems important. Poseidon steps off the chariot with an almost theatrical sigh. He plants the trident in the sand firm, but not aggressive. You remember that this trident once split mountains and boiled rivers. But today it's just a leaning stick. He closes his eyes, raises a hand, whispers. Stillness. The seafloor stills. Bubbles rise like slow thoughts. Even your heartbeat softens. There's a hush in the water. Not emptiness, more like the pause in a lullaby. This is new for Poseidon. For centuries, he's been chaos incarnate. The watery answer to Zeus's lightning tantrums and Hades' ghostly sulking. But now, maybe out of boredom, maybe out of age, maybe because a sea sponge once gave him a knowing look, he's seeking quiet. You float there, suspended between his words and the weightless hush that follows. A historical fact floats into your mind like driftwood. The ancient Greeks believed that sudden stillness at sea could be a sign from Poseidon, not mercy, but warning. Silence before a storm. The calm that says, "You're not paying attention." But today there is no threat, just a god whispering into the current. practicing restraint, and, perhaps most surprising of all, enjoying it. You drift now behind Poseidon's reflection zone, where the water has gone still enough to show your own face looking oddly fish-like in the current, which is rarely a good omen when it comes to Greek gods in large. His brow is furrowed. Today's experiment, using the trident at volume 0, he mutters something under his breath, probably wave gently now, but there's no time for vanity. Poseidon is fiddling with his trident like someone trying to adjust a malfunctioning remote control. Magical objects. The shaft hums faintly. One of the tips sparks and immediately lets out a sputtering pop followed by a puff of startled plankton. Poseidon winces. That wasn't ideal. The ocean waits politely. You're tucked into a kelp hammock at the edge of a tide shelf, nibbling on a piece of dream fruit that tastes faintly like lavender and regret. With a deep breath, Poseidon plants the trident back in the sand. He then adjusts his seafoam cloak, now slightly askew from the minor jolt. "Don't embarrass me," and lifts the trident skyward, and tries again this time, whispering directly into the weapon like it's a fussy pet. Small ripple, just one. There's a twitch in the water. A tiny wave flicks across the surface and gently tickles a nearby oyster. No collapsing cliffs, no shipwrecks, just a blip. You clap softly. He ignores you, but his beard does a self-satisfied little puff, as if preening. But the triumph is short-lived. In the distance, an accidental side effect begins to swirl a modest whirlpool near a popular beach zone, the type with sunbathing sirens and olive-slicked picnic baskets. Poseidon sees it too late. Oh no, he teleports. A blink later, confused water as beachgoers scramble. You're beside him, standing waist-deep in shallow. Not from fear, but from the sheer inconvenience. Someone's lyre has floated off. A goat is shrieking on a driftwood raft. A demigod lifeguard is trying to lasso a watermelon. Poseidon raises both arms. Tries again. "Stop!" he whispers. The whirlpool quivers but keeps turning, now gently spinning a very annoyed pelican. "Please." Still nothing. Then, he murmurs. In desperation, he cups his hands around the trident and tries singing the word. "Steel!" A tremor shudders through the water. The whirlpool stutters and deflates like a deflated balloon, spitting out a lone sandal and someone's half-eaten olive wrap. The beach applauds half-heartedly. One centaur shouts, "Bit late, mate." Poseidon grumbles and mutters something about mortals lacking patience for divine rebranding. He picks up the soggy remnants of what looks like a god-sized picnic ambrosia that's now more sponge cake than sacred, and places them solemnly on a flat rock. This was supposed to be a low-noise demonstration. He tells you. You nod sympathetically, watching a crab make off with a piece of his honeyed fig. He pauses, then chuckles softly. "All right, fine. That was messy." Ancient vase paintings rarely show Poseidon smiling. Now, here's a fun historical detour. Scholars still debate whether that's due to his reputation for wrath or just bad artistic timing. One fringe theory even claims Poseidon had a sense of humor so dry it evaporated most paint used on his portraits. Back on the beach, he's recovering, smoothing out a seaweed blanket and brushing sand off an amphora. "I suppose," he says slowly, "there's value in chaos, but only if you can clean it up afterward." You nod again, lying flat now on the sand, watching a lazy cloud shaped like a sponge drift overhead. He carefully reconstructs the picnic setup. Poseidon doesn't look angry anymore, just tired, like a retired rock star trying acoustic sets for the first time and realizing the crowd still wants at least one loud chorus. Still, he sits beside you, picks up a piece of squished ambrosia and offers it. You decline politely. He eats it anyway. He whispers again, mostly to himself. Stillness is a kind of strength. The ocean agrees. It breathes in and out like it's asleep. A gentle lapping wave nudges the picnic leftovers. But this time no one panics. And so you lie there together, man. God, pelican, by now, and goat listening to the quiet that follows when a storm learns to whisper instead of roar. Poseidon has given up on the trident behaving like a polite tuning fork. He's tucked it under one arm like a half-disciplined staff member and decided to pursue a new angle. listening. You follow him down into the deeper blue, where the light slants in soft green ribbons, and the silence becomes layered, not empty, like velvet soaked in seawater, but textured. He's taking you to his latest obsession, a place the ocean creatures call the School of Softness, and its only enrolled student is Poseidon himself. But the teachers, the school is really just a shell-covered cave tucked beneath a coral shelf, octopuses. Specifically, he steps cautiously into the cavern, the elderly kind with wisdom lines and ink-stained lesson plans, which pulses with a warm, bioluminescent glow. One of the octopus instructors extends a tentacle and pats his shoulder with the faintest plup. Another nudges a scroll toward him labeled, in blocky ink, "You can't control the ocean if you can't hear it." He nods like this is revolutionary. You stifle a grin. The lesson begins. You nestle into a spongy seat made from woven seagrass, your back leaning against a cluster of coral that smells vaguely like antique tea. Poseidon sits cross-legged on the cave floor while 3 octopuses slowly circle him, gently poking at pressure points with their arms and whispering. Well, something. Maybe lullabies, maybe scientific critiques. One draws a spiral in the sand. "Listen to the kelp," says the first octopus, its voice like bubbles beneath a velvet curtain. "Not just the crash of the wave, but the sigh afterward," says another, twirling a pebble. Poseidon blinks. Kelp sighs. You glance over. He's taking notes in the sand using the back of a starfish. Progress. According to a peculiar inscription found on a sunken Minoan plaque so obscure that most archaeologists dismissed it as decorative. Poseidon once swore a 100-year vow of silence after Atlantis sank. Some believe this was his first real attempt at becoming a listener, not just a shouter. Though, as the myth goes, he broke the vow after accidentally stubbing his toe on a sea urchin and yelling loud enough to start a minor volcanic eruption. But now, in this hush-filled cave, he seems genuinely curious. The octopuses present him with their final challenge. Seashell eavesdropping. A row of seashells, nautilus, clam, conch, each one, and a particularly nervous-looking scallop are arranged on a stone shelf. The octopus instructor explains, holds a sound too soft for gods or mortals to hear outright. Only through focused stillness can their whispers be translated. Poseidon leans in, closing one eye dramatically. He picks up the conch, waits, puts it to his ear. Nothing. You're flexing. The octopus nudges his elbow. I am not. You are. You're trying to listen. That's not listening. You chuckle. Poseidon scowls. He breathes out, settles. The cave dims slightly, as though respecting his attempt. You hear it too. Now, a thrum. Gentle, rhythmic, like a lullaby played on kelp strings by an orchestra of anemones. Poseidon gasps quietly. It's singing. Yes, the octopus murmurs. Somewhere in the deep outside, and you didn't break anything to hear it. A seaquake does not happen. That feels like a breakthrough. He tries again. Now, with the scallop. The scallop seems deeply anxious about the attention, but opens slightly to hum a whisper that sounds like, "You're not the only god with feelings. You know." Poseidon flinches. Was that aimed at me? The octopuses just blink slowly. You imagine they've been holding back this kind of sass for centuries. Another historian's footnote drifts into your thoughts, one that claims ancient cults believed certain seashells held voices of long-dead sirens. But only those who approached with humility could hear them clearly. Anyone trying to force the sound would hear only their own fears echoing back. Poseidon places the scallop down gently. His expression isn't wounded. Exactly. Just quieter. He murmurs, "Thank you," to the octopuses, who all nod like smug professors. Then he stands, straightens his seaweed collar, and bows to the cave. You rise with him, your bubble seat drifting away. Outside, the sea feels wider, but lighter somehow. He doesn't grab his trident this time. He just leaves it there, letting it rest. As the two of you float away from the cave, you hear something unexpected. The water around you is making soft, melodic sounds. Not the usual roar or crash, more like breathing. Poseidon smiles to himself. Maybe, he says, if I stop roaring, the ocean doesn't have to shout either. You're gliding now, just above the seabed. As Poseidon cuts a slow path through the velvet blue current, something's different. The water doesn't shudder around him the way it used to. No trident in hand, no angry bubbling. Just the steady, whispery hum of a god trying not to be the loudest thing in the room for once. Then it happens. The sea takes a nap. Not a metaphorical pause or a lull in the tide, but a full-on, all-out underwater doze. No currents, no wavelets, no distant dolphin jokes. The Aegean itself seems to have stretched out, sighed deeply, and fallen asleep face first in the sand. You drift beside Poseidon in the sudden stillness. It's eerie, like being inside the world's largest held breath. Small fish hover without flinching. An octopus mid-reach just stops, like it forgot what it was doing. Somewhere off to your left, a bubble meanders upward at the speed of a half-considered thought. Poseidon looks mildly alarmed. I said ease, not coma, he mumbles, glancing around. You suppress a laugh. Even his seaweed hair seems to pause mid-wave. The gods, you recall, were never fond of unexpected quiet. Ancient sailors once feared when the waves went flat, it meant the sea was watching, or worse, thinking. Historians still argue whether Poseidon ever intentionally created the phenomenon known in some early records as the slumber of the tides. One Athenian philosopher claimed it signaled the sea's sadness. Another said it was Poseidon pouting because someone forgot his offering of fig cake. Fringe believers think he once sneezed too gently, but here and now, accidentally knocking the ocean into a nap. It's all hush. On the surface, mortals panic. Port cities along the Greek coast send out confused scouts to poke the sea with oars. Merchants whisper nervously to their goats. Did you hear that? Exactly. Arms crossed, Poseidon floats upside down like a stunned jellyfish. Down below, you drift closer, cape drooping like a wet towel. Should you wake it up? I didn't think it would work this well. He ponders. I don't want to come off needy. Another beat of stillness. A stingray flutters past like a sleepy pancake. Somewhere in the distance, a sea turtle yawns an impressive feat, considering it doesn't really have lips. Poseidon finally reaches for the trident he left behind earlier, now summoned with the tiniest flick of his eyebrow. It arrives reluctantly. He says, he touches the point to a patch of glimmering sand and whispers. Nothing happens, trailing little clouds of disturbed silt, like it's annoyed to be called back to work. Slightly firmer, a single muscle opens one eye. He says, the sand gives a lazy wiggle, rise, awake, then closes it again. Poseidon clears his throat and mutters, fine. We do this the old-fashioned way. He tilts his head back, whispers, not yells, one word into the deepest part of the ocean floor. Yawn. The effect is immediate. A shiver moves through the water. Bubbles rise in spirals. The waves roll once, like someone stretching under a blanket. Gently, from the shoreline to the trenches, the sea groans like a teenager on a school morning. It's awake, but just barely. You hear the first true wave in hours lap against a distant cliff. Poseidon exhales. That was almost too peaceful, he says, rubbing his temples like a god with a new migraine. It's like giving the ocean melatonin. Still, he looks pleased. The ocean responded not to his strength, but to suggestion. It didn't need to be forced, it needed permission. You hover nearby, noticing something odd now. There are sea creatures gathering. Jellyfish, squids, fish with big, suspicious eyes. They form a kind of floating audience, silent, watching, not out of fear but curiosity. Poseidon glances at them. This is what happens when you whisper instead of threaten. They listen. A passing shark offers a slow nod of agreement. Or maybe it's just digesting. There's a pause, and then Poseidon floats a little straighter, like someone realizing they're onto something. He raises a hand and whispers into the current again. Settle. You watch as the ocean doesn't go to sleep this time, but simply exhales a tide pulling gently inward. And so you float, like it's tucking itself in, surrounded by soft water and the quiet applause of coral fans gently swaying. Somewhere above, the surface world still wonders what happened. Down here, the answer is simple. Poseidon practiced stillness, and the sea decided to try it too. Poseidon is glowing a little now, maybe with confidence, maybe with bioluminescence. You're not sure anymore. He's floating a few inches off the seafloor, arms folded behind his back like a smug substitute teacher who just discovered the students are listening. Time to test diplomacy, he murmurs. Even with the less cooperative life forms, you follow him through a kelp curtain and into the realm of the algae colonies, a place not exactly known for cheerful vibes. These aren't your friendly aquarium decorations. These are long established, ancient strands of royal seaweed with questionable boundaries and a tendency to smother coral just to prove a point. Poseidon slows as the currents thicken with green fog. The algae speak in trembles and bubbles moods, not words. Some of them are in clusters, swaying in defensive choreography. Others curl tightly around ruins of old statues, as if hoarding secrets. He clears his throat. Esteemed chlorophyllic citizens, he begins, in his best underwater statesman tone, I bring peace and softness. The algae don't react, which is expected. Honestly, one Orphic myth suggests they once advised sea deities in secret. Historians still argue whether the algae were ever considered a sentient political body or just a botanical inconvenience. Poseidon couldn't be bothered to weed, but their ideas were so passive-aggressive they were eventually ghosted by all the major pantheons. Poseidon gestures toward a nearby patch of sea lettuce. I understand you felt trampled by my storms in the past. A long pause, then a slow ripple curls up from the sand like a skeptical eyebrow. You stifle a giggle. He tries again. I'm practicing a quieter form of influence now. Less surge, more suggestion. A patch of red algae bubbles. You're not fluent, but the vibe feels like, oh really? He approaches a delicate ribbon of greenish strands, waving politely at the edge of a rocky shelf. These seem more open-minded. He leans in. I ask for nothing today but mutual buoyancy. One small tendril brushes his ankle, the symbolic equivalent of a shrug. But Poseidon smiles. He'll take it. To demonstrate goodwill, he produces a handful of drifting plankton and gently fans it toward the colonies. It's kind of like tossing flower petals at a sulky neighbor's front porch and hoping they interpret it as friendly. A section of algae shifts, not an embrace, but not retreat either, just a lazy spiral outward. As if making room, he bows. I will return with no flood, only patience. You float beside him. The tension in the water lifts just a bit, both of you drifting backward out of the grove like guests who've overstayed their welcome but managed to avoid being hexed. He exhales once you're clear. That was exhausting. Diplomacy usually is his. You say, dodging a gliding jellyfish with too many opinions. He mulls it over. Still, that's the most civil exchange I have had with them since the Peloponnesian War. After a brief but slimy protest, according to one obscure temple inscription found etched onto the shell of an unusually grumpy tortoise, Poseidon once tried to remove an entire algae reef just because it made his underwater palace look smaller. He gave up, declaring the reef the oceanic equivalent of mold, and left it alone. But today, he let them be. And more importantly, they let him whisper. The current starts to pick up again. Softly, you ride it with him, letting it guide you between the ruins of ancient ships and forgotten altars now repurposed by sea urchins. He pauses, gently brushes it with his fingers. They fight so hard, Poseidon drifts beside a rusted spear once held by a drowned hero. He says quietly, and the sea keeps the silence. You both look up. The surface is miles above, but for the first time, it feels closer, like the water is thinner between here and there, as though the ocean itself is breathing lighter. Maybe it's not just about calming me, he says after a while. Maybe the sea needs someone to model what calm looks like. You nod. That feels true. A school of tiny silverfish flickers past like a wave of shared thoughts. They circle you both once, just once, and then vanish into the blue. Poseidon watches them go, then adds, that wasn't bad for a god who once yelled a storm into a teacup, softly. By the time you and Poseidon rise from the algae zones, there's a change in the current. It's not threatening, not even dramatic, just not the crashing kind of loud, louder, the annoying kind, the feathery, flappy, self-important kind that tends to circle fishing boats and scream at tourists for breadcrumbs. Seagulls, hundreds of them. You break the surface with Poseidon beside a jagged islet that juts from the Aegean like a misplaced molar. The sky is bright but hazy, and the rocks are completely overrun with seagulls hopping, flapping, squawking, preening, stealing each other's feathers, and generally behaving like winged chaos incarnate. Poseidon groans, "Ah, right? Them." You raise an eyebrow. Something wrong? They're critics, he mutters, rubbing his temple. The moment the gulls see him, it begins. The squawking swells into what can only be described as a full-blown avian roast. They circle above an uneven formation, shouting over one another. Here comes the whisperer. Did someone lose their thunder? What's the matter? Old man ocean, too quiet for you now. Poseidon squints upward, trying to maintain composure. Ignore them. He tells himself, breathe. Inhale the mist. Exhale the noise. You try not to laugh, which makes it worse. One particularly plump gull lands on a rock and mimics a dramatic shushing motion with its wing, clearly mocking the god's new approach. Poseidon sighs, "This is why I used to just throw waves at people." Historians still argue whether seagulls were Poseidon's accidental creation, an unintended side effect of a spell meant to give fish the gift of flight. One 2nd century scroll refers to them as skyfish with unresolved emotional issues. Another claims they were Athena's idea, designed as nature's reminder that not all winged things are noble. Regardless, they liked him better when he shouted, when he roared. The gulls are unimpressed with Poseidon's recent softness. When waves rose like walls and tridents made thunder, Poseidon, to his credit, doesn't retaliate. Instead, he steps onto the rocky shore and raises one hand not in command, but in offering. "Peace," he says gently. The gulls go dead silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then they absolutely lose it. A volley of squawks rains down. One gull drops a clam as punctuation. Another spins in midair like it's performing interpretive mockery. A younger gull flaps down to Poseidon's feet and squawks with such passionate contempt you're genuinely impressed by the dramatic range. Poseidon closes his eyes. "Okay," he whispers. "Maybe this isn't the audience." But just as he steps off the rock, one old gull swoops low and lands beside him. It tilts its head. Its feathers are faded. Its eyes clouded with age. It says nothing. Poseidon notices. He pauses. He turns back to the water, squats slowly until he's eye to eye with the creature. "I used to make the sky shake," he says to it. "Now I ask the waves to nap." The gull blinks once, then tilts its head again, then unexpectedly nudges Poseidon's shin with its beak. A moment passes. No one says anything. Then the gull flaps upward, circles twice, and caws not mockingly, but softly. The others quiet, not fully, not reverently, but a little. You and Poseidon step back into the sea. The tide is still gentle, lapping at your knees like an old dog nudging for attention. He smiles without showing teeth. "That counts," he says, "one gull at a time." Somewhere in the scholarly deep web of mythology, there is an argument about how birds once carried prayers from shipwrecks to the gods, but really, they were echoes of desperation. Maybe that's why Poseidon doesn't silence them now. Maybe he's learning to listen, dignity fraying slightly, even when it's annoying. As the seagull island fades behind you, a ripple passes beneath your feet. That their cries were misunderstood as shrieks, a small one. Natural, not summoned, not directed, just a soft echo of something old deciding to move differently. And this time, Poseidon doesn't even flinch. You're deeper again now, beneath a layer of gentle twilight water that hums like a lullaby through coral grottos. Poseidon swims ahead with an almost rehearsed grace, arms folded behind his back. He's on a mission, humming a tune under his breath that sounds suspiciously like an underwater version of elevator music. And not just any mission, he's headed to the cavern of echoing coral, a place where the reefs don't just glow, they sing. It's not metaphorical. These coral structures emit soft harmonics when the water moves just right. Ancient mariners used to think the music came from sea nymphs. Turns out, it's geology with good pitch. You follow him through a veil of drifting plankton and enter the coral amphitheater, a wide hollow under a reef wall, lit in pastel blues and purples, with long ridges of stony coral curving up like rows of choir seating. It's beautiful, in the haunting way that forgotten music boxes are beautiful. "This," Poseidon announces, "is where I practice vocal tide modulation." You pause. He nods seriously, very advanced. "Is that just singing to coral?" "Technically opera. A sea cucumber flinches dramatically nearby, as if bracing for something catastrophic. Poseidon steps to the center of the cavern. He raises a hand, closes his eyes, and begins to hum, softly. The first note is low and round, like a stone skipping over deep water. You feel it in your bones. It's oddly lovely. Poseidon shifts to another note higher. The coral responds almost instantly, a faint harmonic that trembles through the reef like chimes buried in sand. Thinner, a little uncertain. One coral fin shudders slightly out of tune, then corrects itself. The entire amphitheater begins to sing back, each note echoing in quiet harmony with the next, creating a circular echo that bounces in spirals through the cavern. It sounds like what silence would sing if it had just one chance. You sit down on a smooth shell beside a sleepy eel. Even it's listening now. A jellyfish pulses in sync with the rhythm. And Poseidon, he doesn't look like a god here. He looks like a conductor of currents, the ocean itself humming through him. Historians still debate whether this coral formation was divine architecture or natural coincidence. Some claim it was formed by a goddess who tried to soothe Poseidon's rages with sound. Others argue the reef developed like a seashell over time, layer by layer, tuned by centuries of passing waves. But local legends agree on one thing. This coral remembers, not in thought, but in resonance. If you shout at it, it resists. If you hum to it gently enough. Poseidon changes keys. The coral flickers pink. It replies. He closes with one final whisper of a note so soft you can't even tell if it left his lips or just his mind. And the cavern responds with a tone so low and deep, it feels like the floor of the sea sighing in its sleep. You exhale. He bows slightly to the coral. Not bad, glancing at you with a smirk. He says, for a god who once tried to drown an entire island because their governor gave him a sarcastic statue, you raise an eyebrow. It was a very sarcastic statue. You sit for a while in the soft, ringing hush. That happened. One of the coral ridges emits a slow, sleepy chord every few seconds, like a heartbeat after a long cry. The cavern itself seems lighter. Poseidon picks up a small chunk of drifted coral and holds it in his palm. It pulses once. He smiles and lets it go, and the coral sings just a little louder. This isn't him taming the sea. The water grows warmer as you drift beside Poseidon. You're heading toward Amphitrite's quarters, not a palace exactly, rising toward a region known for steam vents and domestic tension, more like a sprawling collection of pearly grottos with suspiciously perfect feng shui. This is him asking it to sing along. This is where the Queen of the Sea reigns, not with thunder, but with precision and patience, and the occasional eye roll that can drop a kraken in its tracks. Poseidon slows as the entrance comes into view. A pair of polished shell doors flanked by two glowing seahorses with clipboards. They eye him skeptically as he approaches. State your purpose. One clicks, its voice like a squeaky violin string. Personal visit. Poseidon says, clearing his throat. No title announcements today. The seahorses exchange glances. She's in the shell room. Of course she is, he mutters, then, glancing at you, adds, she's always in the shell room when she's suspicious. You drift inside with him, passing glittering mosaics made from mirrorfish scales. The floor shifts subtly beneath you, an enchanted current that moves guests politely along, like an airport walkway run by starfish. Finally, you enter the shell room. Amphitrite sits at the center on a throne woven from sea anemones and coral branches. Her hair flows in elegant waves, braided with moon pearls. For a while, she's sipping a cup of kelp tea and staring into the middle distance with the poise of someone who's been waiting. Hello, darling, she says without looking up. Have you come to apologize for unbalancing the Western Gulf's migratory currents again? Poseidon lifts both hands. That was an accident, I whispered too enthusiastically. Her eyes narrow. So it was you. You float in the back, trying to blend into the decor like an overgrown barnacle. Poseidon shifts awkwardly. I'm trying to improve, he says, to lead with calm, quieter. I've even made friends with the algae. Temporary truces with overgrown moss are not emotional growth, she replies, raising one eyebrow so imperiously the water seems to ripple with sarcasm. You watch the room hold its breath. Poseidon exhales through his nose like a teenager in a family counseling session. I've been learning to whisper, he says simply. This catches her attention. Amphitrite sets her cup down. To whisper, she echoes. He nods, not just as a trick. As a practice, I calmed the Aegean until it fell asleep. I listened to choral. I stopped myself from vaporizing a flock of seagulls. You quietly applaud in your mind. Amphitrite stands slowly, walks up to him, circles once. Her presence is different from his, less seismic, more tidal, steady and deliberate. She leans in. Is this about that comment Hermes made? No, he says too quickly. You both know it was about that comment. Something about how Poseidon was just a wet version of Zeus with a beard that smelled like mackerel. Amphitrite hums softly. And this has nothing to do with your mid-epic identity crisis. Poseidon's mouth opens, then closes. He finally says, I'm just tired of being the roar. For a moment, her expression softens. Historians still argue whether Amphitrite was Poseidon's equal or simply his consort. Some versions of myth suggest she was the only one who could calm his wrath not with power, but with presence. Others claim she once threatened to move into the Black Sea if he didn't get a grip. Whatever the truth, there's an unspoken agreement here. She sees his effort. She reaches forward. His wobbling attempt at reinvention adjusts the knot in his kelp sash. Well, she says, I thought it was just Persephone's seasonal depression. Poseidon chuckles. Nope. That's me. The Mediterranean has been less dramatic lately. She studies him, then steps back. All right, let's test this new you. You watch her raise a hand and summon a small, swirling eddy in the center of the room. A tight, spinning spiral of water, the kind that could ruin someone's dinner if it slipped through a party. She nods toward it. Calm it, clears his throat. Then, very softly, almost like a breath, Poseidon approaches. Hush! The eddy falters, spins, and slowly wobbles, slowly settles. Amphitrite lifts one eyebrow again. Not terrible. Poseidon exhales in relief. You're trying not to cheer, but the moment passes. Amphitrite returns to her throne and resumes sipping her tea. You may continue your whisper phase, she says, but don't get smug. Poseidon grins. Smug. Me. She doesn't even answer, just gestures for the seahorses to escort you both out. But there's a faint smile in her eyes as you leave. And as the door drifts closed behind you, you swear you hear her humming a lullaby into her teacup. You and Poseidon drift away from Amphitrite's pearly domain in relative silence. The sea has a glassy stillness to it, like a mirror that hasn't yet decided what to reflect. For a while, neither of you speaks. Then Poseidon mutters, almost sheepishly, that went better than expected. You nod. She didn't throw a sea urchin at you. That's progress. He gives you a side glance. She only did that once. Now you're headed to a quiet stretch of seafloor near the Dodecanese, where tectonic plates rest like old gods sleeping under heavy blankets. This is the place Poseidon has chosen to practice something a little riskier, a whisper, powerful enough to nudge the crust beneath the waves. Yes, that crust. He calls it subtle tectonic alignment. You call it probably a terrible idea. Still, you trail him downward as the sea darkens slightly, and the world takes on the hush of geological patience. The sand here doesn't shift. The rocks are arranged like chess pieces no one's moved in a century. It's quiet but not empty. It waits. Poseidon hovers above a fault line so fine it could be mistaken for a cracked clamshell. He lowers his hand slowly, breathes, then whispers, balance. The ground stirs. Just a ripple at first, then a shimmer. Tiny particles rise like sleepy snow. For a moment, it seems to be working. The seafloor shifts, gently, like someone shifting under a blanket. You exhale. Ease. Then Poseidon, trying to fine-tune the motion, leans in a bit too close and adds another whisper. A pause. Then a groan. Not Poseidon. The earth. The fault line opens ever so slightly, like a yawn too wide. A column of bubbles shoots up. You both freeze. Oh no, Poseidon says flatly. The tremor is small, but real. A low, tired rumble echoes through the deep. A distant coral stack sways like a sleepy skyscraper. And then crack. A narrow island overhead, uninhabited. Mostly rocks and stubborn goats, splits down the middle with a sound like a book being gently torn in half. You both rise through the water and peer up as two halves of the island lazily drift apart. forming a narrow inlet no one asked for. A goat bleats angrily from one side to the other. Okay, that was too much breath. You squint at the new inlet? Well, it's kind of scenic. He floats in silence for a while. Poseidon winces, then, looking only slightly embarrassed, he adds, "It's still smaller than the time I shattered that peninsula over a chess game." Historians still debate the origin of several unusual island formations in the Aegean. While mainstream scholars point to volcanic activity, a growing minority of fringe theorists believe many such changes were the result of divine trial and error, particularly involving Poseidon's less graceful mood swings. One scroll discovered in a shipwreck near Nisyros includes the phrase, "He sighed, and the mountain said goodbye." Poseidon floats down and inspects the fault line again. "It was only supposed to hum," he mutters. "Maybe don't whisper directly into the mantle next time." Duly noted. Still, as the water settles, the new passage between the island halves glows faintly. Sunlight pierces through like the sea decided to open a window. Schools of fish dart through the gap, chirping happily. A seal flops in from the left side and seems pleased with the new shortcut. Poseidon watches this unfold. Maybe not a complete disaster, he says. Not if the goats can find each other again. One of them is already swimming across, bleeding dramatically with the energy of a creature determined to make this someone else's problem. Poseidon smiles faintly. Do you think the ocean appreciates the effort? You glance around. The water's calm. The fault line has stopped grumbling. The fish are already redecorating the crack. I think it noticed. He nods. Still too loud. But less than before, you float beside him in the soft hush that follows. The sea, once startled, has already forgiven, maybe even embraced the change. After all, even the deepest layers need a little shaking now and then. Poseidon raises a hand one last time over the new inlet and whispers, with surprising gentleness, "Settle," and the water stills. You're somewhere off of the coast of an uncharted reef now, drifting slowly into a cluster of sea anemones that look like overstuffed beanbags with mood swings. It's here, in this color-swirled underwater alcove, that Poseidon has arranged something unusual, a meditation circle, with mermaids. Yes, that Poseidon. He floats toward the center of the circle, surrounded by anemone poofs and sleepy kelp garlands. As a dozen mermaids blink languidly at him, some stretch their arms. One is brushing her hair with a coral comb that's seen better centuries. Another is picking algae out of her teeth like she's regretting that last bite of sea salad. You ease into a seat as well, tucking your legs beneath you on a squishy sponge cushion that smells faintly like mint and old poetry. The water here feels warm and slow like honey with a tide chart. Poseidon claps once, softly. "Thank you all for joining," he says. One mermaid yawns, another mutters. "Is there kelp tea?" He clears his throat. "We're here today not for conflict, not for storm summoning, but for emotional fluidity." They blink, open sharing. He clarifies. Gentle thoughts, whispered truths. A very old mermaid in the corner squints. Are we still blaming Zeus for everything? Or has that changed? No, that remains the default, Poseidon replies. The circle hums with mild approval. Historians still argue whether mermaids were ever truly part of Poseidon's domain, or just eccentric squatters with incredible hair. Regardless, today they've shown up. Some myths treat them as distant cousins of the Nereids. Others say they were Poseidon's trial attempt at oceanic PR until they unionized. Mostly curious, a little skeptical. One's knitting something out of seaweed, and you're pretty sure it's a scarf that doubles as a net. Poseidon begins. "I've realized," he says softly, "that roaring didn't get me what I wanted. It got me feared, respected, maybe, but not understood." A murmur, a few nods. "I used to think calm was weakness, but it turns out it takes more strength to hold the sea still than to thrash it." A younger mermaid raises her hand. "When did this realization hit you?" He hesitates. "After accidentally knocking over an island while trying to whisper at a tectonic plate." Then the circle bursts into gentle laughter, warm, not mocking. Even the knitting mermaid pauses to wipe a tear. So does Poseidon. You smile. He leans back and opens the floor. A mermaid with turquoise fins says, "Sometimes I feel like the ocean forgets me when it's still." Another replies, "Stillness isn't absence. It's presence without drama." Poseidon nods thoughtfully. "Stillness with awareness." Yes, the conversation ripples out. One by one, they speak about longing, about storms in their own minds, about the pressure to always sparkle or sing. One even shares that she sometimes fakes siren calls just to avoid awkward silences. It's oddly human. Poseidon listens, a beat, no interrupting, no booming voice, just occasional nods, and once, a very quiet me. You glance at him. He's completely absorbed. One mermaid leans forward. You wait. So what happens if you whisper to something that doesn't want to change? He thinks you don't force it. Sometimes the sea listens when it's ready, not when it's told. That gets another round of soft nods. You sit there for what might be an hour or a year. Time means little in underwater therapy. And let the calm stretch like long shadows in the sand. Eventually, Poseidon thanks them, not formally, just a soft, the mermaids disperse like bubbles. This helped me more than you know. Drifting back to their sea caves and hair rituals, one lingers, swims up beside him. You're better like this, she says, still strong, just less exhausting. He smiles. As she disappears into the green-gold light, Poseidon turns to you. I'm not sure I'll ever roar the same way again. You shrug. That's probably for the best. Your calm, broken island. Remember, he laughs. A soft, sea-deep chuckle that stirs nothing but the faintest breeze. You're coasting through a mid-water shelf now, Poseidon beside you, when an echoing blat shatters the peace like a horn at a silent retreat. Poseidon flinches. Oh no. That sound? The conch. Triton's conch. Before you can brace yourself, a massive swirl of bubbles precedes the arrival of Triton Poseidon's son, Herald, and occasional walking megaphone. He bursts into the scene like a thunderclap in a tea ceremony, blowing his enchanted conch, as if he's announcing the end of the world or the start of a minor underwater parade. Father. Triton bellows, swirling in from the eastern current with a glorious fishtail flick. I have been summoned. You weren't, Poseidon mutters, rubbing his temples. Nevertheless, I have arrived. His conch horn spinning in his hand like an overly confident baton. You suppress a grin as a trail of startled eels zips off behind him. Triton hovers in place, muscled, shimmering, and very loud. I bring you words from the surface, he proclaims.